In the far reaches of the galaxy, under the watchful eyes of thousands of species, humanity's reputation was as curious as it was divisive. After humanity joined the Galactic Council, an alliance spanning hundreds of planets, it didn't take long before certain human behaviors raised concerns, particularly around physical intimacy. To many species, close personal contact was deemed unnecessary, even unsophisticated. The Council's ruling came swiftly: physical intimacy among humans was to be forbidden and monitored, labeled as a primitive, unnecessary practice in a galaxy that thrived on logic, governance, and efficiency. Yet, even in the face of strict regulation, human nature persisted. Those who could afford it sought hidden retreats, cloaked stations in remote asteroid belts where contact could be shared away from the Council's reach. It was in one such place that Adrian Green found himself, caught between the regulations of the Council and the quiet rebellion of his own heart. His work as a translator for intergalactic affairs kept him in close proximity to Council officials and ambassadors of various species. His assignments were interesting enough to distract him from the ban, at least most days, but loneliness lingered, a quiet, insistent thing he tried to ignore. He had recently been paired with Zara, a Nairi delegate stationed with him on board the Avendra 9, a Council ship parked just outside the human-controlled Sol system. Zara was humanoid in appearance, but with faintly iridescent skin that shimmered in the light. Her eyes were large, expressive, holding a wisdom beyond her years. She wore a sleek uniform tailored for her tall, graceful frame, which Adrian had learned to admire in silence. One evening, after a particularly grueling day of negotiations, Adrian and Zara lingered in the observation deck. The stars stretched before them, vibrant specks against the inky darkness of space. They shared a few laughs, trading stories of their homes, and against the odds, a rare bond began to grow. "Is it true," Zara asked, "that you humans once connected physically as a form of expression?" Adrian felt his cheeks redden. Though Zara's question was clinical, he sensed an unfamiliar tension in the air, as if some hidden curiosity flickered behind Zara's composed expression. "Yes," Adrian replied carefully. "It's complicated to explain, but it goes beyond words or even our other senses. It's something that feels vital." Zara tilted her head thoughtfully, her gaze lingering on Adrian. "The Council often speaks of this connection with a tone of disdain, even mockery. They argue that it is an outdated weakness, but I find myself wondering, could there be a truth beyond their understanding?" Adrian's heart raced. "You're curious," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Yes," Zara admitted, her gaze unwavering. "I am." The following weeks passed with a tension that both of them sensed but neither addressed. Their conversations were laced with questions, some innocent, others almost daring. Adrian found himself imagining what it might be like to touch Zara's shimmering skin, to know how it felt to reach across the silence that separated them. It wasn't a thought he could share, yet he felt it tugging at him more each day. One evening, while they were preparing for rest in their quarters, Zara made an unexpected proposal. "Would you allow me to experience this closeness?" she asked, her voice soft but direct, not as an experiment, but as a chance to understand. Adrian swallowed, realizing that whatever happened next would change the course of his life. They sat down on the bed, an ordinary piece of furniture that now felt like an arena for something profound, almost forbidden. "Close your eyes," Adrian murmured, guiding Zara's hand into his. Zara's breath hitched, and her hand trembled as she closed her eyes, surrendering to the unknown. Adrian felt the strange warmth radiating from Zara's skin, an almost electric sensation that made his pulse quicken. He shifted closer, close enough to feel the whisper of Zara's breath on his cheek. For a long, heart-stopping moment, the silence between them felt like the heartbeat of a star. "What are you feeling?" Adrian asked, his voice barely audible. "Everything," Zara replied, her voice trembling. "It's as if I am more alive than I have ever been." Adrian closed his eyes, feeling the same rush, the same thrum of life surging within him. The shared moment of intimacy, simple, yet breathtakingly profound, became their secret, a new language that only they could understand. The next day, Zara seemed transformed. Her presence had a new vibrancy, and her eyes sparkled with a kind of knowing. Yet, despite the glow of their connection, a nervousness settled over Adrian. The Council would never understand, and even suspicion could lead to severe punishment. Their encounters continued in hidden moments, woven into the tapestry of their daily lives, each one deepening their bond. They shared stories and silences, small touches that grew bolder, and glances that lingered longer than necessary. Zara's interest was no longer just curiosity, it had evolved into something much closer to wonder. And for Adrian, each moment felt like rebellion and freedom intertwined, a respite from the council's oppressive control. One evening, after a series of particularly demanding negotiations, Zara pulled Adrian aside. Her expression held a gravity that he hadn't seen before. "Something is happening to me," Zara confessed. "I cannot stop thinking about what we shared, how it felt to be close, to feel your presence as if it were woven into my own." Adrian nodded, his heart pounding with both fear and exhilaration. "I feel it too, Zara. But if we're discovered..." Zara's face softened, and she reached for Adrian's hand. "I don't care. I can't return to my life before this. I need to understand why this connection has changed me so completely." But their secret didn't remain hidden for long. Rumors began circulating among the council officials, whispers of human influence corrupting the INIRE delegate. It wasn't long before one of the security agents, an imposing Tarvian with scaly skin and distrustful eyes, cornered Zara and Adrian in the observation deck. "Your behavior has raised questions," the agent hissed, his voice a guttural growl. "Council officials have strict orders. Intimacy is forbidden, and yet, you appear affected." Zara's chin lifted defiantly, a rare expression for the composed Nairi. "You don't understand. What we shared is not a weakness, it's an experience beyond anything I've known." The Tarvian's eyes narrowed. "Then I will make sure the council learns just how vital you believe this primitive closeness to be." As the agent left, Zara turned to Adrian, her eyes clouded with fear and resolve. "The council will seek to separate us. They will claim I have been compromised." Adrian reached for her hand, feeling a surge of protective anger. "Then we don't give them the chance, we leave the ship." But Zara's face fell, and she shook her head. "The Nairi depend on me here. Leaving isn't an option." A dangerous idea began to form in Adrian's mind, and though it was risky, he knew it was their best chance. If they could show the council that intimacy was more than a primitive ritual, if they could prove that it enhanced understanding, even cooperation, they might change the council's view altogether. The task was daunting, but with Zara by his side, Adrian felt ready to confront whatever lay ahead. They spent the next days secretly documenting their interactions, recording Zara's experiences and the changes she noticed in herself. Zara wrote pages of reflections, marveling at how her senses had sharpened, how she now experienced even the smallest details with an intensity she had never known. She felt more empathetic toward others, more connected to the people around her. Adrian helped craft these observations into a report, one that highlighted intimacy as a powerful, beneficial force rather than a weakness. Finally, when they felt prepared, they requested a formal audience with the council. As they entered the council chamber, Adrian felt a weight in his chest, a pulse of fear tempered by Zara's calming presence at his side. The council members, a myriad of beings from across the galaxy, watched them with cool, skeptical expressions. The lead official, a Fenari with intricate scales and a piercing gaze, inclined her head slightly. "Humans are known for their persuasive words," she said, her voice a melodic hum. "But the council has little patience for defiance. State your case, and know that your actions already tread on dangerous ground." Adrian took a deep breath, then spoke with calm conviction. "Our bond, this connection we shared, isn't a weakness. It's changed us, made us stronger, more aware. I've seen firsthand how it has broadened Zara's perspective, just as it's transformed mine. It's not just an act, it's a form of understanding." Zara stepped forward, her face a picture of serenity and strength. "The council claims that intimacy compromises efficiency, yet I am more focused, more attuned to those around me than I ever was before. I would ask you to reconsider." A murmur rippled through the chamber, council members exchanging skeptical glances. Yet some seemed intrigued, their expressions softening as they took in Zara's conviction. The Fenari tilted her head, her eyes narrowed in calculation. "If what you say is true, then the council must witness it firsthand. We shall allow an experiment, monitored and controlled, but if this experiment proves your claims false, the punishment will be severe." Adrian's heart leapt with hope as he exchanged a glance with Zara. They had been granted a chance, small, risky, but a chance nonetheless, and as they returned to their quarters, Adrian knew that whatever happened next, they would face it together. In the days that followed, Adrian and Zara were placed under near-constant surveillance. Council officers rotated in shifts, their eyes trained on the pair, recording every interaction, every conversation. Even the privacy of their quarters was compromised tiny. Hovering monitors tracked their movements, making it impossible for them to be alone. What had once been a relationship of quiet defiance now felt like an open wound, dissected and displayed under the council's watchful gaze. but Adrian and Zara did their best to stay connected, finding small ways to share their bond amidst the scrutiny. They exchanged lingering glances when they thought the monitors weren't watching. Gentle touches passed in corridors under the guise of formality. Zara's writing continued too, carefully detailed reflections on the internal shifts she experienced. Each new page became evidence that this connection wasn't an act of rebellion alone, it was a necessity. One evening, they sat side by side in the shared quarters, silently reading a report from the council that detailed the proposed next phase of their experiment. Adrian could feel the tension radiating from Zara, his normally calm friend fraying under the relentless pressure. Zara, Adrian whispered, reaching over to squeeze her hand. You're not alone. I'm right here. Zara's eyes softened, but she looked away, her voice barely audible. Adrian, I have to admit, I didn't expect this to be so consuming. My people teach control, yet every day I feel less in control. I feel like I'm unraveling and becoming more myself at the same time. Adrian squeezed her hand tighter, his voice barely a murmur. You don't have to hide that from me. Whatever you're feeling, I feel it too. Their connection deepened over the next weeks, taking on new intensity despite the barriers in place. They were growing used to the routine of the surveillance, even beginning to ignore it at times, emboldened by the growing weight of their shared experience. Each day, Zara's writings painted an increasingly vivid picture of the profound effects of their bond. Her senses had sharpened, her emotions intensified. Small details, a pattern of light through a window, the fleeting scent of the ship's artificial air had taken on deeper meaning. She was seeing the galaxy through human eyes, and the experience was transforming her in ways even she couldn't fully understand. And Zara wasn't the only one affected. The guards monitoring them began to show signs of interest, and it didn't take long before whispers started spreading among the crew. Quiet rumors of the experiment drifted from person to person, sparking intrigue, envy, and even a little fear. The council's sterile ideals were being questioned quietly, cautiously as crew members watched Zara, a respected Nairi, embracing a bond their leaders had outlawed. Then, one evening, something unexpected happened. After a long day of monitoring and inspections, the lead guard, a Turkian named Baron, broke protocol and approached them during his shift. Baron was a towering figure with rough, darkened skin, his presence typically imposing. But now he seemed curious. I don't understand, he said, his voice gruff yet hesitant. I've seen you too. The way you connect. And I can't see why the council fears it so much. You seem different, but not weaker. Adrian and Zara exchanged glances, surprised. They hadn't expected anyone from the crew, especially one as regimented as Baron, to question the council's doctrine. Maybe, Adrian said, his voice steady, it's because they don't understand what it means to be close like this. They're afraid of what they can't control. Zara added, her voice soft, this bond has made us more than what we were alone. The council calls it primitive, yet I feel changed, more alive than ever. Baron considered their words, his expression softening. He seemed to be wrestling with an inner conflict, but eventually he straightened, nodded, and returned to his post. The encounter, though brief, left an impression on both Adrian and Zara. They sensed a crack forming in the council's rigid authority, a tiny fracture that held the potential to grow. A few weeks later, the council summoned them once again. This time, the chamber was filled with a palpable tension. Delegates and officials from dozens of species watched the pair with expressions ranging from wary curiosity to outright skepticism. The lead Fenari official, whose glittering eyes betrayed nothing, addressed them. Your reports have been provocative, she said, her tone guarded. The council's opinions are divided. Some see this connection as a dangerous influence. Others wonder if there is more to be learned. Therefore, you will undergo a more extensive test. Adrian felt a prickle of dread. Whatever this new test entailed, he sensed it would push them to their limits. The council assigned them to a remote planet, a small, isolated outpost with limited supplies and a challenging climate. Their mission survived together, relying only on each other. The planet, Ralos 5, was known for its harsh environment, intense sun, freezing nights, and unpredictable storms. The council claimed it was an experiment in resilience, a way to prove or disprove whether this human concept of closeness was, in fact, a weakness. When they arrived, Adrian and Zara's bond was tested immediately. Days bled into nights, and the harsh conditions forced them to rely on each other more deeply than ever. They took turns watching for storms, setting up shelter, and rationing supplies. Adrian fell ill early on, and Zara stayed by his side, nursing him back to health with a tenderness that defied the council's belief that Nairi were naturally reserved. During a particularly cold night, as they lay huddled under a thin emergency blanket, Zara spoke softly, her breath warm against Adrian's cheek. "I don't know if I would have survived this alone," Zara admitted, her voice barely more than a whisper. "I feel as if I've come to know myself better through you." Adrian turned to her, meeting her gaze. "You're stronger than you think. And I'd be lost without you, too." Their hands found each other beneath the blanket, fingers intertwining in the cold. It was a simple gesture, yet it grounded them, reaffirming the bond that had carried them through the isolation, the fear, and the Council's unrelenting judgment. They fell asleep like that, together sharing warmth, finding strength in the closeness they had been forbidden. Days later, the Council retrieved them, their time on Raylos 5 deemed sufficient. They were debriefed, every observation scrutinized, every gesture analyzed. But to their surprise, the Council members seemed less hostile, less skeptical. The reports from Baron, who had become a silent ally, and observations from other crew members had influenced them. Adrian and Zara's experiment had ignited a curiosity among many of the Council's ranks. The lead Fenari addressed them one last time. "The Council recognizes the unexpected resilience you displayed, together on Raylos 5. It is unorthodox, and yet the results cannot be denied. We will allow further study on the matter with other species participating. However, intimacy remains restricted to controlled environments. This is not a victory, but a consideration." Adrian and Zara knew it was only a partial acceptance, but it was more than they had hoped for. Their connection had begun to change the galaxy, however slowly, introducing the possibility that something as simple as closeness could reshape understanding and bridge species. Back in the quiet of their quarters, Adrian and Zara celebrated, their hands entwined, a shared smile between them. "This isn't the end, you know," Adrian said softly. "The Council will keep watching us." Zara nodded, a glint of resolve in her eyes. "Then let them. I have no intention of going back to my old life." For Adrian and Zara, the future held uncertainty, but it also held hope. They had opened a door that could never be fully closed again, a door that would change the course of the galaxy not through conquest or power, but through the courage to connect, to be vulnerable, to share in the simplest of intimacies. And in that quiet, as they lay together under the dim glow of the ship's artificial lights, Adrian realized that this was only the beginning. With the Council's tentative acceptance came unexpected complications. Adrian and Zara had become unwitting symbols of a shift in galactic norms, and with this shift came both fervent supporters and determined adversaries. Some species openly celebrated the Council's consideration, embracing the freedom to explore intimacy, while others saw Adrian and Zara's bond as a dangerous influence undermining the Council's authority. A few weeks after returning from Raylos 5, Adrian and Zara were summoned to a galaxy-wide conference on Naira, Zara's homeworld. The Council intended to address the changing stance on intimacy and examine the potential effects on interspecies relations. Representatives from dozens of species were in attendance, including some who were eager to support the change and others who sought to stop it entirely. Adrian and Zara were invited to present their experiences firsthand, to either bolster or quell the Council's curiosity. As they arrived on Naira, Adrian could feel the tension emanating from Zara. Naira was a world of muted colors and strict decorum, where public displays of affection were rare and subdued. The cities were angular, orderly, and immaculately maintained, with little room for the kinds of unstructured connections that Adrian had taken for granted on Earth. As they walked, Nairi residents stared, and speculative whispers trailed them wherever they went. "Are you nervous?" Adrian asked, sensing Zara's discomfort as they approached the Grand Conference Hall. Zara looked at him, her usually calm face betraying a hint of vulnerability. "It's unfamiliar. I grew up here, following our norms and customs, and now I am breaking the most fundamental of our rules. My family will be in attendance, as well as Council officials I once admired. I fear they will see this as a betrayal." Adrian reached over, squeezing her hand reassuringly. "You're showing them something new, not betraying them. And we're doing it together." The conference hall was packed, representatives from all corners of the galaxy filling the space. The lead Fenari official, who had overseen Adrian and Zara's trial, opened the proceedings with a clear, resonant voice. "Today we gather to address the potential impact of intimacy on interspecies relations," she said. "We are here to hear the perspective of Adrian Green and Zara of Naira and consider the experiences they wish to share." Adrian's heart pounded as he and Zara stepped forward, aware of the hundreds of eyes fixed upon them. Zara's voice wavered slightly as she began, but she steadied herself as she continued. "Our connection has challenged us and pushed us to grow," she said. Through this bond, I've come to understand perspectives I'd never considered and recognize parts of myself I'd overlooked. This is not a weakening, it's an enrichment, a merging of perspectives. Adrian added, intimacy isn't some primitive indulgence, as the council may see it. It's a bridge. For the first time in generations, that bridge could bring us closer together and open possibilities we haven't yet considered. Many in the audience listened with intent expressions, though others exchanged skeptical glances. A formal Tyrian official with sleek, metallic skin and cold eyes stood up to speak, his voice tinged with scorn. This so-called bond is nothing more than a distraction, one that weakens focus and discipline, he said. The council's unity lies in its structure. If we encourage intimacy, we will invite chaos into our ranks. But another delegate, a Nairi diplomat with serene eyes, countered, Zara, I've respected your work for years, but this connection intrigues me. Could it not be that we could become stronger by embracing these bonds, even across species? The council members exchanged glances, unsettled by the rising voices of support. Adrian could see the tide shifting, the council's rigid stance beginning to waver. Though the meeting adjourned that day without a final decision, Adrian felt a spark of hope, knowing they had planted a seed of change. The days following the conference brought both moments of hope and intense resistance. Some species openly welcomed the idea of intimacy, while others doubled down on prohibition. The council responded by initiating an investigation, putting Adrian and Zara under even closer scrutiny. Agents arrived regularly to observe, recording their interactions and subjecting them to tests meant to determine the effects of their bond. It was, Adrian realized, a barely concealed attempt to discredit them, yet he and Zara continued on undeterred. Then, one afternoon, a message arrived from the Rygan, a species known for their heightened empathy and sensory abilities. A Rygan representative named Oren had heard about Adrian and Zara's bond and expressed a desire to meet with them, hoping to experience the closeness they described. The meeting took place in a quiet chamber on Naira. Oren's appearance was striking, with translucent skin that shimmered faintly under the light. They approached Adrian and Zara with a soft, compassionate expression and extended a hand to Adrian. "May I?" Oren asked, a note of curiosity in their voice. Adrian nodded, and as Oren's fingers brushed his, he felt a rush of emotions that weren't his own, an almost overwhelming empathy that drew upon his own experiences and magnified them. Oren's eyes widened as they pulled back, visibly moved. This connection. It's pure, unfiltered, Oren murmured, looking at Zara. I have not felt this depth of emotion from any other being. It's remarkable. The Rygan promised their support, leaving Adrian and Zara with an ally. Their endorsement sparked new interest, inspiring more delegates to question the council's stance. But their victory was brief. Only a week later, the council issued a public decree announcing its intent to enforce the intimacy ban even more strictly, citing irreconcilable risks to unity and order. The announcement set off a wave of protests, and Adrian and Zara found themselves the center of a growing movement for the right to choose connection freely. The council labeled them dissidents, shadowing them with guards and threatening imprisonment if they continued to spread their ideas. Instead of retreating, Zara and Adrian fought harder. They recorded testimonies, spoke to media representatives, and shared their experiences openly, igniting support from unexpected corners of the galaxy. Messages poured in from those who had longed to connect but had feared the council's wrath. Adrian and Zara's bond had become a symbol, a testament to the idea that love and connection could transcend all boundaries. One evening, after hours of strategizing with allies, Zara looked at Adrian with a quiet, resolute expression. We have to take this to the people directly, she said. The council won't change unless they see we're not alone. Adrian nodded. But it won't be safe here. We need a place outside their reach. With help from loyal supporters, they left Naira in the dead of night, seeking refuge on a remote human colony at the galaxy's edge. As they arrived, they found themselves among beings from across the stars who believed in their cause. Together, they formed gatherings, shared their story, and taught others how to bridge the divide between their species. Whispers of a resistance soon began circulating throughout council-controlled space. The council grew wary, their grip slipping as calls for change grew louder and more widespread. Years passed, and as the council resisted, more cracks began to show in their authority. Delegates from formerly conservative worlds petitioned for change, and a greater number of voices joined the chorus for freedom of intimacy and emotional expression. Adrian and Zara's story spread, inspiring those who had lived in fear to come forward and demand their right to choose their own path. In an unprecedented vote, the council finally relented. They issued a formal mandate allowing each species the freedom to pursue personal connections as they wished, marking a transformation of galactic society, not through conquest or power but through courage and connection. As they watched the Council's announcement from their colony, Adrian and Zara held each other's hands, sharing a moment of triumph and peace. Together, they had opened the galaxy's heart to a new era. Yet even with the new mandate, not all accepted the change. Factions arose within the Council, one of the most vocal being the Tyrian faction led by Kren, a powerful and strict leader who saw the amendment as a threat to everything he believed the Council stood for. To Kren and his followers, intimacy was more than a mere distraction, it was a vulnerability that could shatter the structure and order of the Council. Adrian and Zara's colony became a refuge for those exploring connection, but their roles as symbols of change placed unexpected pressures on their relationship. Adrian spent his days teaching, helping those new to the concept of intimacy explore human culture and practices, while Zara acted as a bridge for those whose cultural norms made them wary. But as they found themselves more entrenched in leadership, Adrian sensed a distance growing between them, as the responsibilities took time from the bond that had once been so central. One evening, Adrian found Zara waiting for him after a long day. Her gaze was distant, her expression pensive. "Adrian," she began, her voice soft yet serious. "Do you feel as though we're drifting apart?" He let out a long sigh, feeling the weight of her words. "It's as if we're now part of something much bigger, and I don't know how to separate from that." Zara's eyes softened. "Perhaps we should let others lead. We sparked this change, but maybe it's time for others to carry it forward." The words hung in the silence, and they both felt the relief and bittersweetness of the decision. They had ignited a movement, but they needed to remember why they'd started it, to protect a connection that had forever changed both of them. The following week saw a gradual shift. They began stepping back from the resistance, training a council of dedicated allies to lead the cause. With the weight of leadership lifted, Adrian and Zara found themselves returning to the simple joys they'd once shared. Their days were filled with long walks, shared meals, and quiet moments, rediscovering the intimacy they had once almost lost. But just as they began to settle into this newfound peace, a coded message arrived, delivered by a loyal supporter. It was a warning from within the Council. Kren had begun to mobilize his faction, intent on restoring the Council's old authority. He had declared war, not only on intimacy, but on all those who dared to embrace it. Adrian looked at Zara, feeling a chill of apprehension. He won't stop, will he? We're a threat to everything he values. Zara nodded, her expression grim. Then we'll need to protect what we've built. They gathered their allies, sharing the intelligence and preparing for a possible confrontation. They lacked Kren's military power, but they had something far stronger: the support of species from across the galaxy who believed in their vision of freedom. Together, they devised a strategy centered on diplomacy and persuasion, hoping to sway Kren's followers to their side. Adrian and Zara journeyed across worlds, meeting with Kren's allies, speaking to those who doubted, and sharing the story that had changed them. They knew it was a battle for hearts and minds, and though resistance was fierce, the tide was on their side. After months of traveling and negotiating, Kren's influence began to wane. Allies withdrew their support, and his faction fractured. In time, he was removed from his council position, his power quietly dissolved. The new council leaders voted to make the mandate official and binding, allowing freedom of connection throughout the galaxy. Back on their colony, Adrian and Zara returned to a hero's welcome. Supporters from across the galaxy gathered to honor them and the movement they had inspired. But for Adrian and Zara, the victory felt quieter, more personal. As they watched the sunset from a quiet hill overlooking their colony, Zara rested her head on Adrian's shoulder, breathing in the stillness of a changed galaxy. "We did it," she whispered. Adrian smiled, intertwining his fingers with hers. "Yes, and we did it together." They sat in silence, savoring the peace, knowing that whatever the future held, they would face it side by side.